All right, so I get to introduce my boss, Paul, and I have seen this video probably 15 to 20 times because Paul is my friend and he shows it to me regularly. And anyway, so I'm excited to introduce Paul. He's going to be speaking about partnerships and collaboration. So I see Paul do this daily within Cru as an organization, working globally and within the United States. So please welcome Paul.
Thanks. Do you guys ever feel that way when you start to do a partnership? You know, you're like, hey, we're gonna do a partnership with somebody else, and then the next thing you know, like the other side of the partnership is on a totally different page than you. You don't know how you kind of got to that place together. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today. I'm going to use the words partnership. I'm going to use words like collaboration. I'll even refer to working in a team of teams environment. And that's intentional because those are all words that we all use like interchangeably and in different ways, but I think they require some of the same parts of our character to be at play, as well as some skill sets. I was recently talking with a friend of mine. He leads user-centered design research courses at the Chicago Institute of Design. And he was sharing with me some things they were working on, and I was talking about some things that we were working on, and he said, it sounds like Cru is really doing a lot more with partnership. And I said, yeah, we're really trying to. We've recognized more and more, like every day that we go about this, we realize that we can't get to the Great Commission alone in new ways. We've always said that for a long time, but it's becoming more and more real. And so we have to partner to get to where God is calling us to. And his response to me was, I bet for your organization, that's requiring you to develop some new muscles that you've never had before. And I would say that that's definitely true. So what do we do when we talk about collaboration or partnership? We use words like co-labor, and it's the action of working with someone or ones to produce or create something. We want to come together with other organizations to produce a desired future. Mark McCloskey, that you heard Ken refer to in his talk, by the way, I highly recommend, I've done this several times, putting things that your boss says into a PowerPoint after he says them, because it makes sure he knows you were listening. So Ken actually talked about this as well. Collaboration is the expression of virtue-driven leadership, and we're going to talk about some of those virtues in a second. Why do we want to collaborate or partner? Obviously, the answer that everyone would give is like the Jesus answer. You'd say, well, because we can't get to the Great Commission on our own. And that's true. We can't get to the goals on our own in a shared space. But let's be honest. There is not one person in this room, including vice presidents and area leaders and anybody else, that's smart enough or has all of the information or knowledge that we need to let every person on earth have a chance to hear the gospel. We just don't have it by ourselves. We need each other. We need skills and strengths, not just within this room, but even with outside organizations. And that means that our collective vision is greater than our individual capacities. There's just no way that we can do it alone. The other reality is we operate in the same space. We talked about in the campus ministry in the U.S. and InterVarsity, we're operating in the same space. Imagine what it looks like to someone if we're on the same campus in the United States with Cru and InterVarsity that you heard us talking about, but we're not working together and we're not even being friendly. What would a person who's not a follower of Christ think about that when they see it? We know what we think about it, we see it. What do they think about if we're operating in the same space but we're not working together? What about feelings, right? So we were watching this video just a second ago. Ryan Reynolds, who is the guy on the right, he was so excited, right? He's like, we are all about this partnership. We're going to jump in. We're going to call it a merger. We're so excited about it. Richard Branson, he was a little anxious at that point, right? He started feeling anxiety. We can all feel that way. We can be excited often when we see the result of what might happen from the partnership. But sometimes we may be entering a partnership feeling like we have a lot to lose. We might be walking into collaboration feeling like I'm risking a lot more than the other person who's collaborating or who's partnering. Maybe that's where the fear starts to creep in. Am I losing some of the leadership scope that I've had, or some of the ability to direct things that I've had? Maybe overwhelmed. I feel this all the time. I feel completely overwhelmed by the amount of complexity that's required when you partner and work together with lots of different people. Extremely overwhelmed. Confused. Like, I don't even know what is being talked about right now. You walk into a room, maybe other people have already been partnering, and you enter into that space for the first time and it's fresh, and you're like, I don't even know what's going on right now as I walk into this partnership. And so it could create a lot of confusion. But what is needed? If you're having all these feelings, what do you need? What do you need to be able to operate in this collaboration, this team of teams type environment? And it's what Ken talked about in his first talk, is we have to operate out of virtue. And collaboration is kind of this composite virtue. If you remember, Ken listed DICE +1. I'm going to talk about DICE in a second. Collaboration is kind of this composite virtue that shows how we have to integrate all of those things into one space. It's those dynamic determinism, intellectual flexibility, courageous character, emotional maturity. That's the DICE that Ken talked about. And really just would say that the more that we have pressed into partnership within the U.S., the more that I have seen these areas of my life and leadership challenged. That I'm challenged with this idea of intellectual flexibility, right? I thought that there was a certain way to do things, but the moment you start to partner, you realize that the other person at the table doesn't have the same way of doing it. And if we can't get out of that stuck place, then we can't move forward in partnership. It requires a lot of character, because if you're going to partner, you're not always going to see eye to eye. You're not always going to be on the same page. And so it requires a tremendous character and a lot of emotional maturity, because I can guarantee you in partnership, you at times have to say, I was wrong. You have to have the emotional maturity to be able to admit that you've made a mistake somewhere along the way, or that you offended someone, or that maybe your way wasn't the best way. And that requires a lot of emotional maturity to put yourself out there like that. We're not going to click on this in the slide deck, but I shared the slide deck with you so you'll see it afterwards. And I would encourage you to look at the South African apartheid case study that we put together. I could have Marie stand up and tell you a lot more about it than I could anyway. So, but it's when Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk got together and basically began to forge a way forward. If you want to see an example of two individuals that were coming from two dramatically different places and how they forged a partnership to get to a better shared future, this is an incredible case study. And so it's a couple of pages. I'd encourage you to read it. If you click on that, it'll take you to a link in the slide deck. But it's a really great case study we don't have time to hit today. A couple of things I want to touch on. For us, some things we've had to be honest about that will kill the idea of partnering together almost immediately. Is a territorial attitude. And the minute we start thinking this is mine, these are my people, these are my staff, these are my volunteers, these are my donors, whatever you're thinking of as mine gets really pressed into when you start to partner. If you don't have your own clarity on direction, outcomes you're shooting for, what's your level of responsibility, those are things that will immediately kill collaboration, because you're walking into a room, you don't even know what you're bringing to the table, if you will. If you're too busy, if you lack the time and energy to engage in collaborative work, it won't happen, because collaborative work requires more time than work alone. You can get it done by yourself a lot faster. And so you've got to be sure you're making the time for collaboration. And poor communication is another key one. A couple more: lack of trust, not believing the best in the other person or team. I've seen this when we begin to work across organizations a lot, is that the other organization, they'll have different language, they'll mean something different. And if you don't have an immense amount of trust, then your first thought is, well, they don't agree with me. They're not on the same page. They don't want the things that I want, versus saying, I'm curious about that. I want to press in more and learn how they think and how they talk, because you have a trust that you're going after the same thing. Being defensive about your own ideas, your own ways of doing things. And the last one is power dynamics. This can happen a lot, especially if one part of the partnership is bigger or smaller than the others, right? We're rarely exactly the same size when we partner with someone else, another organization, or even within our own organization. And so anytime that happens, we have to be aware of power dynamics that come into play. In the last couple of seconds, I'll just touch on what collaboration isn't. It's not negotiating, networking, or building alliances. It's not everybody trying to do the same role. It's not consensus. Partnership doesn't mean you have to agree on everything. That's not what collaboration is all about. And it's not dictating to the other party what their role and responsibilities are. So these are all things that we've been pressing into and learning together as a team. And then again, in the slide deck, you'll see all these different kinds of collaboration as we talk about that you've experienced. One-on-one, team collaboration. Teams can operate in a shared space. Digital marketing in the U.S. is working with audience expansion in the campus ministry. And so that's two teams working in a common shared space. Short-term project. You guys remember Global Launch Week when we did that in SLM? That was a short-term collaboration where lots of entities came together to go after a common goal. And it can also be ongoing. Known and Moving is really an ongoing collaboration that's not just specific to digital strategies. It's a collaboration that goes across MCCs. And digital maturity obviously requires lots of collaboration between operations, digital strategies, and other MCCs as well. I got a couple of thoughts here. I'm not going to press into them now. When you go through the deck, just encourage you to think about some of these things in your own life when you look through this deck. What are areas that I need to grow in that will help me become better at partnering and collaboration? Thanks.